What happens when the game you've been dreaming about for years finally arrives? And it's not the warm, cozy escape you imagined? That's the question I've been wrestling with after finishing Tales of the Shire, a game that promised me a slice of Hobbit life so authentic I could practically feel the grass between my toes. On paper, it had everything: fishing, farming, cooking, dinner parties, and a charming storyline about turning the sleepy village of Bywater into an official town. And let's be honest, as a lifelong Lord of the Rings fan, I was all in. This was supposed to be my comfort game of the year, the one I'd sink endless hours into, losing track of time as I perfected my Hobbit garden, forged deep friendships with quirky neighbors, and explored every nook of Middle-earth from a cozy domestic angle. I was ready to live out my Shire fantasy, second breakfast included. And sure, I saw the reviews before release. IGN slapped it with a brutal 4 out of 10, and usually that's enough to make you close the wallet and walk away. But here's the thing. Cozy games never review that well. Critics tend to judge them by the same standards as massive open-world epics or adrenaline-pumping shooters, and that's just not the point of the genre. So, I didn't flinch. In fact, when I saw the Steam reviews calling it mostly positive, I thought maybe IGN had just missed the mark. Maybe this was going to be one of those hidden gems you have to experience for yourself to really appreciate. Spoiler alert, the truth isn't that simple. Because after nearly 20 hours in Bywater, I can tell you this isn't the disaster the lowest reviews make it out to be. But it's also not the cozy masterpiece it could have been. The truth sits somewhere in that frustrating middle ground, where flashes of brilliance keep you hooked just long enough to run face first into clunky mechanics, questionable design choices, and performance issues so bad they yank you right out of the immersion. And here's the wild part. If the entire game had been like its last 5 hours, I'd be sitting here telling you this was one of my favorite cozy games in years. But instead, the first half feels like wandering through a beautiful but empty stage set, where the promise of something magical is always just out of reach. So in this review, I'm going to break down the good, the bad, and the why this game is such a frustrating mix of both. From its charmingly written hobbits and lore-soaked story, to its glacial pacing, invisible tutorial, and bugs that made me want to rage quit entirely. We're going deep into what works, what doesn't, and whether Tales of the Shire is worth your time and your gold right now. Because on the surface, it's a Hobbit life sim. But underneath, it's a cautionary tale about how even the coziest games can fail to stick the landing if they forget one thing. You can't build comfort on top of frustration. And that's where we're going to start, with the dream game I thought I was getting, and the reasons it had me hooked before I even pressed start. Let's rewind to before I actually played Tales of the Shire. If you had asked me to design my ideal comfort game, it would have looked almost identical to what they promised. A Hobbit life simulator where your days are spent fishing in sparkling streams, tending to a lush garden, cooking up hearty meals, and hosting dinner parties for your neighbors. Add in the quest to help Bywater earn official town status, and a steady drip of Lord of the Rings lore, and, well, it sounded like Middle-earth's answer to Animal Crossing, and that's not an exaggeration. This game had all the right hooks for someone like me. Fishing to relax after a long day in the real world. Farming to build something satisfying over time. Cooking not just as a chore, but as a creative social mechanic. Dinner parties as a way to deepen relationships. Because, let's face it, if you're playing as a Hobbit, food should be a core game mechanic. A small-town storyline with real stakes, however humble, to give your cozy activities a sense of purpose. Even the setting had me excited. The game takes place between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, which is a period we don't often get to explore. You're not dealing with world-ending battles or dark lords here, just the quiet, day-to-day life of a Shire resident. And for fans of the books or films, the promise of spotting familiar names and references was irresistible. It was like getting a backstage pass to Tolkien's world, but without the looming threat of Mordor breathing down your neck. This is why I didn't lose hope when IGN's 4 out of 10 dropped, cozy games often get unfairly dinged in critic reviews for being slow or light on gameplay, when that's literally the point. They're not designed to be adrenaline rushes. They're designed to be safe, charming spaces where you set your own pace. And besides, Steam's mostly positive rating told a different story. Surely, I thought, this was one of those games where the critics didn't get it, but the players did. The first few minutes even seemed to confirm it. You start by designing your Hobbit, tow hair and all, and stepping into the picturesque village of Bywater. The visuals, while not mind-blowing, had that soft storybook feel. The opening quests introduced me to the locals, and right away I was struck by the writing. It was witty, warm, and full of personality. Some hobbits were as friendly as you'd expect, while others were delightfully grumpy. And I love that. Not everyone in the Shire should be a ray of sunshine. Then there was the dinner party mechanic. I love the idea that friendships weren't just built through talking or gifting random items, but by hosting these thoughtfully planned gatherings. You'd send out invitations, choose a venue, and even cater to your guests' cravings, sweet, salty, spicy, or bitter, by cooking dishes with ingredients you'd foraged, farmed, or bought in town. It wasn't just flavor text either. Nail the right combination, and you'd earn a big friendship boost. And here's where the promise really started to show. Friendships weren't just cosmetic. Level up a villager enough, and you'd unlock tangible rewards. More rooms in your house, new recipes, even entirely new areas or mechanics. This was smart design. It gave socializing a real gameplay impact, and it tied perfectly into the cozy community-building theme. For a while, I thought, yes, this is exactly what I signed up for. It felt like the kind of game I could sink into over weeks, slowly uncovering secrets and building my perfect Hobbit life. And with the story of Bywater's push for official town status humming in the background, there was always a bigger goal to work toward. But here's the thing about promises. They're only satisfying if they're delivered in full. And while Tales of the Shire had all the right ideas, the execution in the early hours, well, let's just say it made me feel like I'd been invited to a feast, only to find half the dishes still in the oven. Because beneath that charming surface was a pacing problem so severe, it nearly derailed the whole experience before it had a chance to shine. And that's exactly what we need to talk about next. Before we get into the laundry list of problems, I think it's important to give Tales of the Shire credit where it's due. Because, yes, I have my fair share of gripes with this game, but when it nails something, it really nails it. And if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, there are moments here that will absolutely warm your little Hobbit heart. First off, the writing. This is hands down the game's strongest suit. Every line of dialogue feels like it could have been pulled straight out of Tolkien's world. The game doesn't just sprinkle in the occasional Easter egg. It's dripping with them. Names, places, offhand references. They're woven in so naturally that you feel like you're actually living between the events of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And that matters, because so many life sims failed to give their world any real sense of place or history. Here, you can tell someone cared about getting the tone right. Then there's the villager personalities. This isn't one of those games where every single NPC smiles at you like you've just saved their life. Some hobbits are friendly, yes, but others are short-tempered, skeptical, or just plain rude. And weirdly, I love that. It made the village feel more real. More like an actual community with its quirks and frictions. When someone eventually warmed up to me after a few dinner parties and errands, it actually felt earned. Speaking of dinner parties, this is probably the most charming core mechanic in the whole game. The way it works is deceptively simple. Send out invitations, choose who you want to invite, and where you want to host it. Plan the menu, read your guests' letters to find out what flavors they're craving. Hunt for ingredients, whether that's farming them yourself, buying them from shops, or foraging across Bywater. Cook with care, balance flavors and textures to really wow your guests. Host the party, present your dishes, decorate the table, and watch your guests' brutally honest reactions. And I mean brutally honest. If you mess up, they'll let you know with a facial expression that says, I'd rather eat lembas for a week than finish this. But if you get it right, you'll see those friendship meters climb faster than it took up a pantry shelf. The beauty of this system is that it's not just cosmetic. Friendships actually drive progression in Tales of the Shire. Hit certain milestones with villagers, and you'll unlock tangible rewards. Things like extra rooms in your house, the ability to renovate, and recipes that open up entirely new cooking possibilities. Some villagers even gatekeep big features of the game, which I'll get into later. But the point is, socializing matters here in a way it doesn't in a lot of other cozy sims. Another thing I appreciated, the slow expansion of your toolkit. When you start, your cooking setup is hilariously bare bones. Think chopping board and frying pan. But as you progress, you'll unlock more stations, allowing you to create more complex and appealing dishes. It's a simple but satisfying loop. Improve your kitchen, cook better meals, host better parties, make more friends, unlock more stuff. It's one of the few systems in the game that actually feeds into itself really well. And while the early game feels painfully slow, we'll get to that in the next section. I have to admit that once you've built up a decent circle of friends, the world starts to feel a little more alive. Shops open up more stock, your garden gets bigger, and your house starts to feel like your space rather than a starter hut. There's also something very Hobbit about the way the game leans into food, as both a social and mechanical driver. In most life sims, cooking is just another task, something you do for energy or to fulfill a quest. Here, it's a genuine bridge between you and the rest of the village. It's the glue that holds the game together, even when the pacing is falling apart. So yes, Tales of the Shire does have these little pockets of joy, moments where you stop, take in the scenery, and think, this is why I wanted this game. The problem is, you have to wade through a lot of dead air to get to them. And that's where we hit the first big wall, the early game pacing. Because for all its charming writing and dinner party fun, Tales of the Shire starts out less like a cozy life sim and more like a scenic, but very, very slow walk. Here's the thing. When you hear Hobbit Life Sim, you expect a certain rhythm, a cozy loop of tending crops, cooking meals, chatting with neighbors, maybe fishing by the river before heading home for second dinner. But in Tales of the Shire, the first 5 to 7 hours feel nothing like that. In fact, they barely feel like a life sim at all. Instead, the opening chunk plays more like a narrative walking sim, and not the deeply immersive kind either. Most of your time is spent traveling from one character to another to deliver a line of dialogue, only to be told to walk somewhere else and do it again. Sometimes you'll get a small fetch quest, like cooking a specific dish or handing over an item. But just as often, it's literally, go talk to this person. And you will walk, slowly, everywhere. Which brings us to one of the game's strangest design choices. There's no sprint button, none. The fastest movement you get is a whimsical skip animation, which is cute for about 3 seconds before you realize it's still slower than what you'd expect from modern life sims. Combine that with the fact that there's no fast travel of any kind, and suddenly, those charming walks through Bywater start feeling like chores. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but if the scenery's gorgeous and the world's alive, maybe that's fine. And that's the real problem. It isn't. The world looks nice enough in still moments, but it feels strangely empty in motion. Any NPC who isn't a main character will mostly just stand there like a decorative prop. Sometimes they'll have a single line of text floating above their head, but more often they're just lifeless set dressing. You can't chat with them, you can't interact, and they won't react to you unless you physically bump into them. And don't get me started on navigation. Instead of a mini-map or quest marker, the game uses birds to guide you, literally. They'll sit on signposts or along the path to indicate the right direction. On paper, it's a charming, immersive idea. In practice, it's inconsistent and often confusing, especially if the NPC you're looking for is inside a building. Sometimes the birds will perch on the building you need. Sometimes they won't. The result? I spent way too much time opening the map every 30 seconds just to confirm I was heading the right way. But the biggest pacing killer in the early game? Locked content. And I don't mean content you can't access because you're under-leveled. I mean entire mechanics hidden behind friendship milestones that the game barely explains. Clubs, animal care, major farming upgrades, all of these are gated behind relationships you won't even start building seriously until hours in. And because the early main quests don't require you to throw dinner parties or focus on friendships, it's entirely possible to miss out on the best parts of the game until it's almost over. Fishing, farming, and foraging, the supposed core activities, also feel aimless at first. They only start to matter much later, when quests and clubs give them real purpose. Until then, you can do them, but they feel disconnected from the main story, like side hobbies rather than pillars of gameplay. It's such a strange problem because the developers clearly built a lot of interlocking systems, but they don't let you engage with them until you've already slogged through the least engaging part of the game. And in a genre where first impressions matter, that's a dangerous move. Cozy game players are patient, sure, but we're not saints. If the loop isn't there early on, a lot of players will check out long before the good stuff unlocks. The frustrating part is knowing that all the things I just mentioned, clubs, deeper farming, better fishing, even taking care of animals, do exist. But the game makes you dig through hours of underwhelming errands before it lets you touch them. It's like someone inviting you over for a massive Shire feast, and then telling you you can't have second breakfast until you've spent half the day peeling potatoes. And unfortunately, the early game slog doesn't just test your patience. It also exposes how shallow the world feels before the systems open up, which leads right into another major issue. Tales of the Shire misses several key opportunities to make you feel truly immersed in its world. For a game built around the idea of living your best Hobbit life, Tales of the Shire leaves a surprising amount of the Shire feeling empty. And not in the peaceful countryside way, in the this space should feel alive but doesn't way. The most obvious offender? The background NPCs. Bywater is supposed to be a bustling little village, but most of the time it feels like the set of a play where the extras haven't been told what to do. Walk past anyone who isn't a key character, and 9 times out of 10, they'll just stand there, silent and motionless. No idle animations, no random chatter, no acknowledgement that you even exist. Occasionally, they'll have a single floating dialogue bubble, something as thrilling as, "Nice day today." But you can't interact beyond that. They're essentially animated scenery. And this lack of life extends to the animals. Yes, there are sheep grazing in the fields, cats wandering around, birds fluttering overhead, but they might as well be cardboard cutouts. You can't pet them, feed them, or really interact with them in any meaningful way. The most you can do is wave at some of them, which, while cute, is not exactly the cozy tactile connection people expect from this genre. In a life sim, petting the dog isn't optional, it's mandatory. Then there's the sound design, or more accurately, the lack of it. Cozy games live or die on atmosphere, and that's built as much with audio as it is with visuals. But Tales of the Shire often feels eerily quiet. Take dinner parties, for example. You'd expect the sound of cutlery clinking, gentle conversation, maybe the occasional laugh or a chair creaking as someone leans in to tell a story. Instead, you get music, and that's it. No chatter, no ambient noise, nothing. And if you're playing on Switch and the music bugs out, enjoy your silent, awkward dinner party. The absence of voice acting also hurts more than I expected. I'm not saying every cozy game needs full VO, but when your core loop involves talking to characters constantly, even partial voice work could have helped breathe life into them. Without it, conversations feel static, like you're reading lines in a visual novel without the charm of distinct vocal personalities. And it's not just social immersion that's missing. The world itself feels oddly underused. Bywater is beautiful in still moments, but when so much of the game is walking from place to place, you notice how little there is to do along the way. No small events or random encounters. No side activities that make you want to slow down and explore. It's just paths and quest markers, or birds, until you arrive at your next objective. Even the navigation mechanic, those charming little birds meant to guide you, ends up breaking immersion. At first, it's cute and fits the Tolkien vibe, but when you're lost for the third time because the birds didn't perch where you needed them to, that charm fades fast. It's a great idea, undermined by inconsistent execution. The thing is, all of these issues would be easier to forgive if the game's pacing didn't already feel slow. In a title that's deliberately unhurried, you need the world to reward you for taking your time. Here, too often, it just doesn't. Instead, you're left with the sense that you're passing through a world that looks nice in screenshots but struggles to feel alive in motion. And yet, for all these missed opportunities, there is a point where Tales of the Shire suddenly clicks into place. When the mechanics open up, friendships start paying off, and you finally have reasons to engage with the systems beyond fetch quests. The problem? That point doesn't come until deep into the mid-game. Here's the part that really stings. Tales of the Shire actually gets good. Like, really good. But by the time it does, you're probably 10 hours in, and most players will have already bounced off. It's the gaming equivalent of slogging through a dull party, only for everyone to suddenly start having fun right as you're putting your coat on to leave. The turning point comes when the game finally opens the door to friendship quests and clubs. Up until this point, relationships are mostly just there to drip-feed you recipes and the occasional house upgrade. But once you hit level 3 friendship with a villager, entirely new quests start appearing. Quests that actually unlock meaningful content. And then there are the clubs, which are basically Bywater's version of skill guilds. There are 4 of them. Foraging Club. Levels here give you extra inventory slots. Fishing Club. Better rods, new fishing spots, more types of fish. Cooking Club. New utensils, more complex dishes, better flavor balancing. Farming Club. Expands your garden and makes it more efficient. The best part? Each club's upgrades feed directly into the other systems, creating an actual gameplay loop. You forage more because your inventory's bigger, which helps with cooking, which boosts friendships, which unlocks more quests, which feed back into the clubs. This is what the early game should have been doing from the start. And it's not just the clubs. Mid to late game friendships unlock features that many players won't even know exist unless they stick it out. You want to take care of animals? You can, but it's locked behind a specific friendship quest. You want to massively expand your decorating options? Also tied to relationships. It's baffling how much core content is hidden behind a wall the game barely points you towards. What's worse is that when you do finally hit this stride, it's incredibly satisfying. I found myself avoiding the main storyline just so I could grind clubs, max friendships, and see what else I could unlock. This was a completely different energy from the first half of the game, where I was just trudging through tasks. Suddenly, I was planning my days, fishing in the morning for profit, foraging in the afternoon for cooking ingredients, dinner parties in the evening to level up friendships. That loop was addictive, which just makes it even more frustrating that it's buried so deep. The problem is pacing. I finished the main story with all 4 clubs at only level 2 out of 5. That means I saw less than half of what these systems had to offer before the credits rolled. And yes, there's endgame content, but it's not compelling enough to keep me going. Now that the main hook, the village's town status quest, is resolved, by the time the game really starts to sing, you're already at the end of the song. Decorating, too, suffers from this late-game bottleneck. Sure, you get some wallpapers and flooring early on, but the bulk of the furniture you'll actually want comes from, you guessed it, friendship rewards. Unless you're laser-focused on socializing from the get-go and ignoring the main quests, you're not seeing those items until the later hours. And that's assuming you haven't burned out on the slow start already. And yet, when the systems finally click, Tales of the Shire becomes the game I was hoping for. There's depth, there's variety, and there's that cozy sense of living a small, meaningful life. which makes it all the more painful that the developers didn't front-load any of this in a way that would hook players earlier. It's like saving dessert until after the party's over, and wondering why no one stayed to eat it. Unfortunately, the few smart late-game systems are also tangled up in questionable design choices, mechanics that don't just slow you down, but actively get in your way. And some of them are so strange, you'll wonder how they made it through testing. If Tales of the Shire had only suffered from slow pacing, I could chalk it up to a design philosophy that just didn't click with me. But some of its mechanics aren't just slow, they're actively counterproductive. These are the moments where you stop and think, who thought this was a good idea? Let's start with my personal favorite headache, the grumpy villager mechanic. Here's how it works. If you don't invite a villager to a dinner party for a while, they get grumpy. You get a letter in the mail telling you this, and until they cheer up, you can't invite them again. Sounds harmless, right? Well, there's no way to actually cheer them up. None. You just have to wait, and that might not seem like a big deal, until the main story asks you to throw a dinner party for 2 specific villagers, and one of them is in a sulk. That happened to me early on, and I had to burn 2 full in-game days doing busy work while waiting for them to magically feel better. And remember, you can't time skip. You can only go to bed when it's evening. In the early game, when you have very little else to do outside the main story, this isn't cozy downtime, it's dead time. Then there's inventory management, which somehow manages to feel both restrictive and inconvenient. Your starting inventory is tiny, and while you can expand it through the foraging club, that's a slow late-game unlock. In the meantime, you'll constantly be running out of space, especially because cooking recipes often require 5 or more ingredients. And without fast travel, every time your pockets are full, you have to trudge back home to stash items in your pantry. The pantry storage is generous, but getting to it is such a trek that it starts to feel like a punishment. The game also undermines its own story immersion in some weird ways. There are no real cutscenes. Everything happens as a static conversation in your current location, or you get teleported to a new spot for another static conversation. For a game so heavily dependent on narrative, this makes big moments feel oddly flat. The quest design suffers from this too. Even when you're doing something important, it's often framed as talk to this person, now go talk to that person, with nothing dynamic happening in between. And here's one that might seem small but adds up fast. Slow unlocks on basic quality of life features. Want to take care of animals? Locked behind a friendship quest? Want more cooking tools? That's mid-game club progression. Want to make travel less tedious? Well, too bad. For a genre where progression is supposed to feel rewarding, Tales of the Shire gates far too much behind hours of early game grind. Individually, none of these choices would tank the game, but stacked together, they create constant friction. You're not just dealing with slow pacing, you're dealing with systems that make it slower in ways that feel unintentional and easily fixable. And even when you push through all that to reach the good parts, you still have to wrestle with the game's single biggest flaw, its performance. If there's one thing that can tank a cozy game faster than slow pacing, it's bad performance. And Tales of the Shire doesn't just stumble here. It trips, face plants, and drags itself through the dirt all the way to the credits. Let's start with PC, which should have been the safe platform. I have a reasonably powerful setup. Not top of the line, but more than capable of handling a game like this. Even so, I had to fiddle with settings to get it running smoothly. And there were still moments where the frame rate dipped for no clear reason. For a game that's visually charming but not graphically demanding, that's a red flag. Then there's the Nintendo Switch, where things really fall apart. Frame drops aren't just common, they're a regular part of the experience. During the day, it's at least tolerable, but once the sun sets in-game, the lighting changes tank the visuals. Everything becomes muddy and desaturated, to the point where I was squinting to see paths and objects clearly. And there's no brightness setting to fix it. Considering that nighttime takes up more than half of your in-game hours, that's a serious blow to playability. It gets worse on Switch 2 in handheld mode. Despite holding a more stable 30 frames per second, the larger 1080p screen makes the visual flaws even more obvious. Paradoxically, it can look worse than the original Switch simply because it's exposing how low quality the assets are up close. And then there's the camera. I'm someone who can get motion sick in certain games, and Tales of the Shire pushed me right to the edge, especially on Switch with its frame drops. I had to dive into the settings to lower camera sensitivity, which helped, but the inconsistent frame rate still made long play sessions uncomfortable. But the real killer? The bugs. I've played early access titles that shipped with fewer issues than this full release. At first, they were small and mostly visual. A character clipping through a chair, an object floating in midair. Annoying, but not game-breaking. But once I crossed the 14 to 15 hour mark, things escalated. Here's just a sample. Every time I loaded my save, I spawned under the map. I had to reload 3 or 4 times before I'd appear in the right spot. My entire crop field glitched, stopping all growth. I didn't notice for over an hour, and when I did, I realized those crops were tied to a main quest. That was 90 minutes of zero progress. Cutscenes, what little there are, occasionally bugged out, leaving random UI elements or textures hanging in the air. On Switch, the dinner party music sometimes failed to play at all, leaving me with awkward, silent gatherings. None of these are the kind of cute, oh-well glitches you laugh off. These are progress-stopping, immersion-breaking problems that scream, not ready for release. And they stack up the longer you play, making the endgame, ironically, the part of Tales of the Shire that's actually fun. The most unstable part of the experience. And that's the tragedy here. When you finally push through the slow start and unlock the satisfying loops, you also start hitting the worst technical issues. It's like the game is punishing you for sticking with it. Which brings us to the big question. Is it worth buying at all, right now? That's where the final verdict comes in. So, is Tales of the Shire worth your time? And your gold, right now? If I'm being brutally honest, my answer is no. Not at its current price, and not in the state it's in today. It took me just under 20 hours to finish the main story. And while there is a bit of endgame content, more club levels to grind, friendships to max out, decorating to finish, it's not compelling enough to keep me hooked now that Bywater's town status quest is wrapped up. More importantly, there's almost no replayability here. Once you've seen the systems, you've seen them. And given how much of the good stuff is locked behind late-game walls, I'm not eager to start over just to experience that drip feed again. The sad truth is that Tales of the Shire feels rushed despite multiple delays. The concept is fantastic. There's so much potential here for a cozy, lore-rich life sim that celebrates everything Hobbit culture is about. And when the game's systems finally open up in the last third, it's proof that the pieces are there for something truly special. But instead of front-loading the charm in the gameplay loops, it buries them under hours of slow, underwhelming errands, and then ships with enough bugs and performance issues to undercut the fun when you finally get there. For cozy game fans, that's a deal breaker. This genre thrives on comfort, on flow, on the satisfaction of small but meaningful progress. And you just can't build that comfort on top of frustration. Not when there are other cozy titles on the market right now, at lower prices, that run better, respect your time more, and still give you that warm, immersive escape. Could Tales of the Shire get there eventually? Maybe. The devs have already mentioned hotfixes and patches, and if they can smooth out the performance, fix the bugs, and restructure the pacing so players see the best parts sooner, this could transform into the game I thought I was buying, but that's all future tense. Right now, this is what you get. And it's not enough. So if you are hoping to jump into Bywater for a laid-back, polished Hobbit life sim, I'd say hold off. Wait for patches, wait for a sale, or maybe just wait until second breakfast to decide. But that's just my take. If you played Tales of the Shire, I want to hear your experience. Did you run into the same pacing and performance issues I did? Or did it click for you right from the start? Drop your thoughts below, and let's talk about whether this game deserves a second chance, or if it's time to move on to greener hobbit holes.